Cultural and Gender Differences in Learning by Harmeet Kaur, Stephen Sills, Kyla Sherlow, and Talitha Peacock. This presentation looks at 5 papers, which each deal with various aspects of gender and cultural learning differences. The first paper looks at models of epistemological development, how college students' ways of thinking develop and change. The second looks at some of the challenges of teaching members of different cultures, and the necessity of acknowledging the culture while recognizing the individual. The third paper examines differences in learning abilities between boys and girls. The fourth paper examines how instrumentality and mastery influence levels of anxiety in both men and women. And the last paper looks at the variables of gender and culture on the development of psychopathology. Models of epistemological development. Researchers wanted to answer the question of whether college students' thinking progressed from simple to complex. W. Perry first examined this question and created a schema for an individual's way of knowing by using 3 epistemological positions. 1. Dualism. Students believe what they hear from authority figures in regard to what is right and what is wrong. 2. Multiplicity. Students believe that information is neither set in stone nor controlled by external factors, because every individual has the right to their own opinions. 3. Relativism. What one thinks to be true is considered and evaluated based on evidence and context. Perry's 3-stage model was studied and elaborated by many researchers who were also interested in discovering whether a college-age student's level of knowing and thinking was affected by different situations, and whether it grew from simple to complex. Perry influenced and inspired many researchers to look into how students learn and create their own ways of acquiring and utilizing knowledge. This finally led to the development of West's 4-stage model of epistemological development. West created a 4-stage model that extended Perry's previous model to include personal opinions, as well as the idea of rules, in addition to authority and evaluation of information. Stage 1, absolute knowing. There is only one right answer and no room for uncertainty. Stage 2, personal. Individuals use personal knowledge to understand and make sense of things, and to believe they are always right. Stage 3, rules-based. These are discipline-specific rules. The students show an inability to judge whether one expert opinion is better than others. Stage 4, evaluative. Testing knowledge using experience and evidence to come to a conclusion. What does this mean for practice? We must be aware that students have different stages in which they learn and acquire knowledge. Some may do so more simply and will look at information given as a means to an end or as an absolute truth. Others may evaluate information to better understand and expand their current knowledge. This was Perry's legacy. In the next paper, we examined cultural ways of learning. Ethnocentrism is the belief that your own values, attitudes, and worldview are superior to that of another culture. It is often present in monocultural societies. A multicultural perspective advocates for cultural sensitivity and an appreciation of perspectives other than one's own. One of the challenges within a multicultural society is to address the question of differing learning outcomes amongst different cultural groups within that society. There is also the challenge of addressing similarities in learning styles within a culture while allowing for individual difference. In addition, observed behaviors in a cultural group should not be seen as static traits, and the impact of historical events and environments should be recognized while allowing for cultural change. There are several ways to approach differences in cultural learning styles which are problematic. The first, deficient model thinking. This is the assumption that cultural behavior that is different from the dominant group is inherently inferior. Sometimes efforts to combat deficient model thinking tended to gloss over differences in cultural practices. This was detrimental to the minority groups because the dominant culture tended to emerge as the norm. It is ultimately more productive to acknowledge differences without attaching value judgments to one over the other. A second problematic approach occurs when cultural differences are seen as general traits and apply to entire ethnic groups. This view does not acknowledge differences between people within that group, or the fact that both the culture and the individuals change over time, or may behave differently in various environments. Members of a culture may be identified as learning holistically rather than analytically or cooperatively versus individually. Understanding values and histories of a cultural group can be very helpful, but is not useful if it leads to overly broad generalizations about a cultural group. There's a difference between seeing a behavior or a trait as inherent in a group and understanding the environment which might produce a particular style of learning. For example, a study showed that recent Mexican immigrant children showed greater observational skills and asked for fewer explanations than children of families who'd come from Europe several generations back. Researchers suggested that this might be because Mexican children are included in adult activity more frequently than European American children were. Rather than suggesting that Mexican children are more visual learners and European children are more verbal learners, or that these learning styles are traits, researchers suggest that the difference lies in children's environments. The next problematic approach is assuming that membership indicates participation in a cultural group. It is worth noting that within a particular cultural group, the extent to which an individual participates in cultural practices varies considerably. In addition, over time, the extent to which a member of a cultural group participates in cultural norms may change significantly. Ethnicity does not necessarily equate to participation in culture. The next problematic approach is to not provide for novel learning experiences. Expecting learning to take place based on what is known about the group does not allow for individual difference. It also assumes that all learners from a particular group have a similar set of experiences, skills, and interests, and fails to provide novel learning opportunities. The last problematic approach is a simplistic explanation of learning in various cultures. The trade approach to understanding cultural differences can happen simply because of a reductionistic perspective, which is easier to understand rather than a nuanced one. It is also easier to match up a learning style or technique with a simplistic perspective on culture. However, this approach does not lead to optimal learning opportunities. Constructive approaches. The cultural historical approach can help to look at how variation between individuals has occurred historically. You can also identify commonality in a cultural group without applying a single trait to all individuals in that cultural group. Individuals live culture, so it is not generally helpful to treat culture as a thing separate from the individuals of which it is comprised. Linguistic and cultural historical repertoires are developed by observing and practicing culturally shaped behavior. These behaviors may influence how an individual uses language, takes tests, or solves problems. Repertoires should be viewed as a set of skills that can be used with flexibility depending on the demand placed on the person. These skills may relate to interactions with authority, problem solving, reacting to praise, interacting with peers, and other behaviors which could be viewed as personal traits. For example, a teacher working with children of a cultural background different from her own might be able to find novel and creative ways to incorporate cultural practices and ways of relating or speaking into learning. But some feedback is necessary on these types of teaching techniques from members of the culture in question to ensure that the teacher has found a useful teaching technique and is not merely teaching to a trait. The students should also be encouraged to work outside what is already known to them to ensure that they develop the skills to learn in novel situations. When considering research in the area of cultural learning, it is useful to use past tense language, as it reminds us that culture changes as the people in it change, and what has been a cultural practice in the past may not hold true in the future. Historical descriptors of groups, such as Protestant, urban, or second generation, can be useful to locate a cultural group in history, but should not be assumed to necessarily be predictive of individual behavior. The cultural forces in an individual's life are not static, and should be viewed as shifting or dynamic in the influence that they have over the individual at various times in their life. And finally, researchers should be very cautious about making generalizations unless they have had an opportunity to witness cultural behavior in multiple settings and within multiple groups from that particular culture. In our next paper, researchers looked at sex differences in learning abilities. Researchers looked at some stereotypes and assumptions in regard to boys' and girls' learning abilities and problems. Some of these included boys having more learning and adjustment issues in comparison to girls, whether they were more likely to be treated for learning problems, and if there were any real differences in verbal and spatial ability based on gender. What researchers found was that there are many stereotypes and assumptions surrounding these questions. However, gender only accounts for 5% of these differences. So what causes these differences? One might assume that an individual's opportunity to learn and gain new knowledge may have an impact on how boys and girls learn. It has been noted that boys usually have more of these opportunities in comparison to girls, especially in subjects such as math and science. Some implications for teaching and counseling based on these findings would be to be cognizant of the fact that a boy or girl's learning ability may not be based on their gender. It may be affected by how many opportunities the child has been given to learn certain subjects and expand on this knowledge. Educators must assist in providing learning opportunities for all genders and be aware that the difference in learning across genders does not come from one source. The fourth paper aimed to test the ways in which instrumentality and mastery influence levels of anxiety in both men and women. They ensured that variables such as daily hassles and social desirability were controlled while collecting data in order to gain a clear understanding. The results of the study showed that women reported significantly lower levels of instrumentality and mastery. These include low levels of aggressiveness, self-confidence, assertiveness, and control over forces that affect their lives. Women also reported significantly higher levels of anxiety and higher levels of perceived daily hassles. The opposite was true for men. With these results, it is evident that instrumentality and mastery influence reported levels of anxiety between men and women. High levels of mastery and instrumentality, corresponding with lower levels of anxiety, were indicating that a gender difference in anxiety does exist. Interestingly enough, there was no gender difference in measures of social desirability. According to the gender role orientation theory, the masculine role that males are expected to abide by does not allow the expression of fear. In addition, males are encouraged to manage their stress independently. Females, on the other hand, do not feel restricted to express their fears in moments of crisis. In fact, according to the theory, it is considered acceptable to seek support and avoid objects that may be dangerous or evoke fear. Despite the fact that women have developed a stronger assertiveness in society, gender differences still exist. The learned helplessness theory refers to the long-standing exposure to events that are uncontrollable, which result in the perception that one cannot control their environment or situation that occurs within. Many theories of feminism assert that at an early age, girls are given the perception that they have limited control over circumstances and are provided with fewer opportunities. This decreased level of mastery can put girls in a greater risk for anxiety. In contrast, boys are taught to expect power and encouraged to hone traits of self-confidence and assertiveness. It is important to keep in mind that the information collected may not accurately represent the population. Due to reporting bias, men may be less likely to report symptoms of anxiety because it is not representational of their masculine societal gender roles. Because women are encouraged to express such concepts, the data may simply be higher due to a willingness to report symptoms of anxiety. The reporting bias suggests that due to these factors, levels of anxiety may be the same amongst men and women. The last paper looked at gender and culture as moderators or mediators of the development of psychopathology in children and youth. There are numerous stressful events that occur in the environments of children and youth that can influence the development of psychopathology. Different characteristics and variables within cultures, environments, and individuals are associated with an increased or decreased risk that external stress will lead to symptoms of psychopathology. Grant et al. Reviews the findings of numerous studies regarding how different factors moderate or mediate the development of psychopathology. The following slides will review some of the important findings of Grant et al. The role of gender is reviewed as a moderator, while the aspects of family culture are reviewed as mediators. But first, we need to define moderators and mediators. Moderators are variables that influence the relationship between the two other variables. Mediators are variables that account for the relationship that can exist between the two variables. Grant et al. Summarized how studies demonstrate that different stressors and negative outcomes are associated with different genders. According to this study, boys may be more likely to experience stressors from poverty, divorce, and abuse, which lead to psychopathology. These stressors can be linked to conflict-based experiences and result in maladaptive behaviors and are more likely to be manifest in external symptoms. What we can take away from this is that a male student who has experienced poverty, witnessed or experienced divorce, or experienced abuse may be significantly impacted and experience symptoms that impede learning or development. Girls, on the other hand, are more likely to experience symptoms of psychopathology after experiencing exposure to violence, exposure to disaster, and cumulative stress. These symptoms are more likely to be internal and associated with feelings of anxiety. It is possible that these symptoms could manifest themselves in different ways and contribute to difficulties in learning and developing. It is important to note that this study misleadingly identified that it had been hypothesized girls' self-esteem may be more connected to their relationships and take on more stressors from their peers, which influence greater rates of cumulative stress and depression over time. In reviewing the cited study by Nolan, Hoeksema, and Gerges, however, it is concluded that data does not support this hypothesis, and girls are not at a higher risk of developing depressive symptoms, although they are more social. Societal and parental support can be critical in supporting individuals who have been abused or exposed to violence. Having positive support from close relationships reduces the chance of stressors related to these events, leading to a boy or girl experiencing symptoms of psychopathology. Helping promote social support or working to increase family support may also then be helpful for supporting a struggling student or client. The study concluded that more research with theoretical backing is needed in order to further explore these associations. Race was identified to be a moderator for symptoms of psychopathology. Caucasian youths, but not African American or Latin, were found to be at an increased risk for developing symptoms of psychopathology. The study hypothesized that specific variables within diverse cultures and ethnic families may offset the effects of stress on adolescent youth, though more research is needed to understand this association and their applicability to the functioning of an individual or learner. Females have been demonstrated to be more likely to engage in self-blame in circumstances of maltreatment. This may lead to more psychopathology and problems that may provide barriers to a female's ability to learn and develop. Similarly, research by Grant and Compass supported this hypothesis by finding that maternal cancer can lead to daughters taking on added family responsibilities and increasing their risk of experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression. Significant evidence exists to support the role of family cultural characteristics as mediators to symptoms of psychopathology. Parent-child relationships and parenting behaviors influence the risk of children experiencing stressors that lead to greater mental health problems. Aspects of family culture such as warmth, cohesion, and family support are important for significantly influencing the impact of stressors. Stressors such as economic hardship, abuse, exposure to violence, and family conflict disrupt interpersonal relationships and can influence family interactions. This is exemplified by a study by Hirschberger and Degeli, who demonstrated that victimized lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals reporting high levels of family support and self-acceptance experienced significantly fewer mental health concerns. Alternatively, conflict between students and their parents about academic performance and future education and career can increase the risk of a student experiencing psychopathology. Similarly, families experiencing economic hardship, or what Bronfenbrenner might refer to as a shock to the macro system, are associated with maladaptive behaviors and patterns in the family dynamic or culture. Economic struggle is associated with poor parent-child relationship. Parents' use of harsh tone of voice, inconsistency in discipline, decreased warmth, increased family conflict, and reduced parental support is associated with children experiencing mental health concerns. As a result, we believe that prevention programs and interventions can be implemented to support families experiencing economic hardship and low socioeconomic status. By helping to reduce financial stress and improve family functioning, we can hypothesize that symptoms may be reduced in children. There are numerous external stressors that impact children and youth, but maintaining positive family relationships can help to provide a buffer. Future studies are needed to assess how family, environmental, and individual variables interact to explain how stressors can be intervened with, so that they don't lead to psychopathology and larger mental health concerns. In conclusion, gender and culture and their impact on learning is an incredibly broad and complex field of study. While far from providing a comprehensive understanding of the subject, these 5 papers provide us with some interesting takeaway points. Individuals learn at different rates and gain their knowledge of learning from authority figures, personal experience, and experimentation. In teaching in a multicultural setting, it is important to appreciate cultural commonalities while recognizing individual differences. More research must be done in regard to gender differences in learning and to determine whether or not gender is the key to understanding these learning differences. Women experience higher levels of anxiety than men. Encouraging assertiveness, independence, and healthy competition in girls at an early age may be able to help mitigate the effects of anxiety. Sex, gender, and aspects of family culture influence individuals to experience stress differently and can help to explain why certain stressors lead to psychopathology.